here is where I think it is genuine, the Bible is genuine science. It is, aligned with each of all of the scientific knowledge that we've been developing. It's phrased differently, but it is talking about basically the same thing, essentially the same thing, the essence of it. At the same time, I think coming up on the end of issue 288, which was the last one, the double issue that these pages are from, and because it was taking a long time to draw, I was eating up my lead time. I was at the point where I had, it was basically about 12 days ahead, so that I had an extra 12 days to work with. But I also realized you're going to have to study all of these subjects, explaining the birth of stars, human birth, blood, all of these things. And you're sort of counting on the fact that all of this information is going to be available to you, and that it's going to confirm your theory. And I think that was one of the first times that I had the real sense of what faith was about. That it's either there or it's not there. I mean, this is going to be really embarrassing to have devoted 25 years of my life and then go up and look it all up and have to run 11 issues going, sorry I was wrong, sorry I was wrong, sorry I was wrong. And it was also, I'm not a scientist by nature. I dropped out of high school, grateful that I never had to take chemistry because I saw my sister go through chemistry classes and I'll never get through it. But now I had to not only fake my way through it, as you do most of the time in high school, when you just memorize this long enough to pass the exam, I'll never have to think about this again. And I had to actually read the material, understand it, and then double back, actually, again, be able to say, unless I understand exactly what it's saying, I have to keep doubling back until I know definitely what it's saying. And another common experience for people who are not familiar with science is when you go to the library, there's a spectrum of books to read. You can pick up this one, which is the most thorough going, but it's like it's printed in a foreign language because it's so advanced and it's so meticulous. All I was trying to do was to find out what is the universe doing. And scientific texts, they'll tell you for about 3 sentences what the universe is doing, and then spend 8 pages explaining why they're right. And this was supported by this, and this guy came along and said this, but he turned out to be wrong. The reason he was wrong because he did this. It's like, I just want to know what the universe is doing. I trust you that you figured it all out, and you got all the supporting evidence. So, again, the clock was ticking, but I did develop the ability to go, okay, there's the advanced calculus text, and then there's, our friend, the hydrogen atom, in the children's section. I'll find a book somewhere in between there. Something, all I want to do is know what the universe is doing. And it was an amazing experience with the clock ticking and using up every minute of my lead time, sitting and reading these books that a lot of times were way beyond, definitely beyond my interest. And one eye on the clock. Like, I've got to get back to the drawing board at some point. I need key pieces of information. They get so close to telling me, and then go into 10 pages and explaining why they're right, and I can't miss it, because I'll miss it on the way by. And used up all of the lead time, and then sitting at the keyboard, and now having to type it as the biblical text that you will see that is actually in the storyline. It's not running alongside of it now. And just saying, I just have to type it as clearly as I can, just the facts, man, but just as if you were Shakespeare writing it. Get all the spelling and the syntax and everything right, and running out of time, just write it all out, break it down into panels, 9 panels a day, and do the 9-panel bridge. And I got to the end of it and did the quick math, counted up all of the different verses that go into the explanation. 360 of them, 9 panels a day, 40 pages, which is exactly the room that I had for 40 pages. And that's one of those times that you go, thank you.
That is interesting. So it wasn't like, all right, I've got 40 pages, so this part of my explanation, well, I just can't fit it. It was like, here, I'm doing the explanation first. I sure hope it fits.
I sure hope it fits, and I hope that there's room to cut stuff. If I've got to cut 10 panels, I hope there's 10 panels of fat on there. And yeah, that was...
I want to, just to sort of give maybe people who aren't familiar with Cerebus some background information, like the clock's ticking, I've got this lead time. And as you'll see in the exhibition, there are some pages that are really good at illustrating, or I should say some production materials really good at illustrating the kind of the way that Dave and Gerhard divided the workload. As I was mentioning to some of the other Cerebus readers that I know from, I think intellectually I know Dave does writing and characters and Gerhard does background. So you see, as we have in the exhibition, what a page looks like when Dave's done something, and it's just these characters. And you think, wow. Gerhard has to draw a line on that page.
Well, it's also, it was very difficult as an artist when you see the pages without the backgrounds. Picture coming to the end of the day, you work 8 hours, and you go, yeah, that's good. That was a full day's work. 4 little heads, had 7 word ones, half of the heads are missing, and boy, I feel like I really accomplished something there. Look at that.
And
hey,
then,
I'm an artist.
And then we also see there's plenty of preparatory sketches, these tracing movement sketches that Gerhard basically created backgrounds on, and then transferred to the page. So you see the division of that workload. And since Dave was working on just the characters, just the word balloons, over a period of, I guess, a year, you had built up this lead time where say you're done with issue 274, Gerhard's just now finishing up 273. But you know that it's not time until...
Yeah, we actually had, because there were 20-page issues, we had 20 nails in the wall with books on in my studio, and 20 nails with books on them on Gerhard's wall. So essentially, I would fill up my wall with an issue while Gerhard was putting the backgrounds on the pages on the other wall. And then when he was done, he took all the pages down, put them in the FedEx box, going out to the printer, transfer all of the pages over to his wall. And that was always disheartening. I had a whole issue there, this morning, and now it's empty. Now I just got books and names.
And get to work.
Get to work. Yeah, you're way behind. And actually, then at that point, because I was, trying to work and maintain the lead time and get as much more lead time as I could for all of this research that I knew that I had to do, then we would end up with, there's 20 pages on Gerhard's wall, 20 pages on Dave's wall, and Dave's also got his Orphans of the Floor. These are the pages that I finished that we don't have hooks and nails for yet, but I'm stacking them up here. And I think that at the peak of that, I probably had an issue and a half down here, an issue on the wall, and an issue on your wall, which then becomes daunting for Gerhard. It's like, okay, I got all of this and all of that. But it also gave an advanced look. It's like, where are we going to divide up the time there? I want to spend 2 days on this. Going with a lot of solid black, I picture.
I'll go ahead and this is a good point to just know that we're sort of doing this artist talking in 2 sections. And we're going to go to the question and answer section for Dave shortly. Then we're going to have a brief little break as we move over to where the gallery, where the exhibition is actually installed. And so we can 5 minutes, and then we'll to talk to Gerhard and sort of hear Gerhard's side of all this. But what's interesting to me, going back to the last day, if you created the script for it, and okay, now it's in 40 pages, it's also great because if it was short, you could just go out, speak Gerhard, good job, add something in there. So it was going to be
nice cathedral here. It was going original.
It was going to be about the text, as you said, the text had entered into the text panels, the panel content panels at this point, which is, I think, a subtle distinction for somebody who, especially if you haven't read a comic book before or looked at one, that this balance between text and pictures or word balloons and pictures is very finely balanced, because when you look at it, you sense right away, as you do, I think, in the word story pages or the Torah commentaries, the text is separate, and then here's the image. And I've been saying, yeah, they do relate, but now it relates even more. The words are the same, the service is just little corner pages here. And also maybe we can just wrap up telling people sort of how it is at this point in the last day. We follow service on the last day of his life. I'll give away at the end.
Spoiler warning. Everybody has to head up.
But he writes down this story of creation, service in the soil, and then sort of puts it away, puts it in a secret compartment, with the idea being that in Cerebus' world, 6,000 years later, this is going to be found by somebody, I don't know who wrote it, but that information actually does enter into the Cerebus storyline. When I say that this is Cerebus' destiny, that him to write this down to then pass on to the generations that come after him,
yeah, it was sort of because as the writer of any book, you do assume, or sort of, you flatter yourself that you're taking God's place in your storyline. These are your creations, which I think is directly obvious that we are God's creations in exactly the same kind of way. We're about as easy as ink drawings for him to do, and we're about as complicated as ink drawings compared to him. But yes, this was a way of indicating that Cerebus had been pretty much a complete failure all the way along. So it was, no pun intended, a Hail Mary pass at the end. I'm just going to have to give him the whole scripture, write it down, put it in the stone behind the fireplace, thinking that it's safe, which is silly because he's completely senile. The odds that he can't remember what he had for breakfast, and he's hiding, this scripture behind the stone in the fireplace. And trying to end on a hopeful note that even if this isn't going to fix the disaster that the world has turned into because of Cerebus' mishandling of his side of the equation, Rick had done a really good job, and Cerebus had just spent the rest of his life fumbling the ball. It's okay, the ball does keep going, and at some point it will cause a great improvement in the world when it's rediscovered, sort of like the dancing frog in One Foggy Evening, the Warner Brothers cartoon. You're demolishing it to put up the shopping mall. Dancing frog. Not that scripture is literally like the dancing frog. I don't want you to, I suppose it is in a way.
Yeah, I like that, the hopeful, sort of hopeful ending for the Cerebus character. Before you see the depressing ending of issue 300, where he falls out of bed and dies on his stomach.
Now we have ruined it for you.
Well, but the thing, you can't really, it's not
You just cost us several hundred dollars in sales.
Yeah.
I wanted to know how it was going to come. Oh, it is.
He's been saying since 1979 that it was going to end the character. So there you go. That's the Cerebus project in a nutshell. And I guess at this point, before we go over to where Gerhard's going to talk far more about the drawing, the actual production, the artwork, than the sort of writer side of it. If anyone has questions for Mr. Steve, we will open the floor now to you.
Yeah.
When, after issue 1, you started writing, drawing, when did you have a mental map of the totality of the project, and did you have the books in your head before you finished one and went to the next, or did you finish one and then come up with the idea for the next? And when did you know you were going to have 300 issues?
That was actually at issue 14 when I decided to go monthly. It had been bi-monthly before that, and this became, this is now what I'm going to do for a living. And I was pretty sure that I was able to produce an issue a month. Then the question became, how far am I going to go? And my first inclination, knowing that Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster only got one Superman, Charles Schultz only got one Peanuts. I had always said, if I ever got my cartoon equivalent, I'm going to grab one and not let go. At the same time, I didn't want to let go while I was still able to draw at peak efficiency. So yeah, the decision was made in issue 14 that I would go to issue 300 in a big way, because in the comic book field, going to 300 issues, it's a very select company. It's named characters. Superman has 300 issues, Batman has 300 issues, Spider-Man has 300 issues. So my assumption was, even if I never got any better, I would still be, in the same pantheon as those guys, just on the number of issues that I was able to produce. In terms of after that, it was largely a matter of micromanaging, make sure you put 20 pages of entertainment in each issue, but try and have a large story arc in mind. So really, starting with issue 26, I decided that issues 26 to 50 were going to be one story. At this point, it was, if I'm going to fill 300 issues, I don't think I want to do 300 individual humorous episodes that don't really add up to anything. So it was, let's start with a 25-issue storyline, which became High Society, and let's learn as we go along. At the time, I thought, 500-page story, I can tell the history of the world in 500 pages. And as I got into it and started breaking it down, it's a political storyline, started breaking it down into campaign, breaking it down into governing, and these events have to take place like this. And I got probably about half, maybe a quarter of what I intended into the 500 pages. So then, the next one, it was like, oh, okay, we're going to have to let out the shower curtain on this one. The next one, we're going like 1,200 pages, and let's see if I can do the religious storyline that I thought High Society was going to be half politics, half religion. Now it's, okay, it took me 500 pages to sort of get half of the ball on politics. Let's see if I can do a thoroughgoing religious storyline in 1,200 pages. And that was a little more successful. So then at each stage I just learned, this is how much information you can get into a page, this is how much information you can get into an issue, this is how much information you can get into 500 pages. And essentially from that point it was mentally breaking up the story into 500-page High Society story, 1,200-page Church and State, 500 pages Jockey's story, the little one after that, 250 pages Melmoth, then 1,100 pages Mothers and Daughters. Help me out here, what's the next one after that? Guys, I should have known that. And Guys was again a short one. It's 250 pages or around there. And then Rick's story. Then was the three-part religious storyline, Rick's story, latter days and the last day, which is what's on exhibit, but broken up with the giant cross story in between. So it was having to learn on the run, but very, very satisfying for that. I did learn a lot more about the structure of my favorite medium, comic books, just because I had to.
I think something that might be, again, difficult for someone who wasn't a comic book collector from an early age. I was doing 300 issues also sort of kept you in the public eye. You know, there's an issue every month. I mean, literally, since the time I started buying Cerebus back in, whatever it was, like 92 or 3.
How old were you then?
First time I was 16 or 17 or something like that. I could drive myself to the comic book store. And literally, for the next 10 years, until March of 2004, literally, the first Wednesday of every month when I went into my local comic book store, I knew there was going to be a new issue of Cerebus there. I mean, it was like clockwork. And that's something from the reader side of it that you just, I mean, it's sort of like what TV's starting to do now, and shows like Lost, like, well, yeah, you watch my TV, but if you hook them and you get the storyline that goes on, of course TV and TV, they do one every week, you know, the Suffering Cerebus reader had only a month in between, and the Suffering Cerebus creators created every month, and it was there every month, the first Wednesday of every month, it was in the store, for, in my case, 10 years, but for, you know, the course of the storyline, 26 years, and which is pretty amazing. And also, those of us who read as it's coming out, pretty neat coming out. How many people can say they've read a novel 20 pages at a time over a period of 12 years? Any other question?
I mean, I commend you for looking into the Bible, you know, to get information about God. And of course, you didn't go there for that purpose, really. It seemed you went through really some kind of conversion. And I was just wondering, maybe kind of a two-part question. So what happened there? I mean, can you explain that? I mean, why you came to this idea that this is talking about doing that? And also now, do you see yourself attracted at all to any of the established churches or anything in Judeo-Christian tradition?
The answer to the first question, you're right. I certainly came to it with the wrong attitude. You know, I'm coming to this to make fun of it, and as I say, the experience was a matter of an experience. It was unprecedented in my life. That reading, as I said, you know, the first 10 chapters of Genesis, realizing as someone who had always been an intellectual-based person, I'd always read with the eye to I'll read this author and find out what this author is reading. Who does he think are the most insightful and wisest individuals? And then I'll go and read him and find out who he was reading, and hopefully climb the pyramid one step at a time in that way. And that was definitely the experience of, you get up to Dostoevsky and Tolstoy pretty quickly. That's almost universal, that these are the great writers. These are the ones who have the best handle on things, and the ability to express it accurately. But the experience of reading the Bible was, no, this is authentic. This is the difference between a truly well documented, this is what happened, versus an interesting theory or interesting entertainment wrapped around an interesting theory. So I'm not sure if that answers your first question. That was the tradition that I came from, and was, again, very blown away by the fact that the clarity, both as a reader and a writer in reading the Bible, that this was very, whatever it was very, very clear, and in a very internalized way, not accessible to my intellect, but the gut instinct, the same thing that told me this person is good and this person is full of BS when I was reading. There was no BS, it was all clarity. But it is, in my case, it is based on scripture. Having read the Torah and having read the Gospels and having read the Quran, I did attempt going to a Christian church for 6 months in 1999, having sort of looked at myself in the mirror and said, okay, if there is this clarity here, aren't you somehow obligated to participate? It's one thing to go, yes, on an intellectual level, I think this is it. But at a specific point, rather than just talking to God in your head, at some point you're sort of obligated to go down on your knees before God, and I had a definite sense of that. The only real problem that I had with going to church was the diminishment of Scripture, that they read one chapter and the rest of it was singing, and the minister telling folksy stories about his family and this thing that happened when we went on the picnic last week, and I'm going, this is all very interesting in its own way, but couldn't we get like 4 more chapters of Luke in here instead? So at that point, having had a pretty good track record of going to church, I went, this is just not my kind of thing. But I think I'm going to have to find my kind of thing. And I had been donating to a television program in Toronto called Reflections on Islam, and ended up getting an Ibn Mubarak card from them every year, and also the 1 year, I think it was 2 days after I was going, well, if I'm not going to church, maybe I should try fasting and Ramadan. And literally 2 days later, the envelope came in the mail from Reflections on Islam with the prayer times for Ramadan that year, which began that year, December the 8th, and ran for 30 days. And that was the same clarity that I got from the Bible. Fasting for 30 days, praying 5 times a day, specific prayer times, not in a Muslim fashion, but the prayer that I had been reciting to God morning and night, instead of morning and night for 30 days, I was going to recite it at the 5 prescribed Muslim prayer times. And thinking as essentially along the same lines as the experiment of going to church, I'm going to give this a try. Let's see if I can get through a week. First time out, I'm probably not going to get through the 30 days, but I'll try and go a week. And just this sudden onset of, again, perfect clarity. I felt about 12 years old. Everybody was remarking, you lost weight? What's up with it? And it's, I'm fasting and Ramadan. So now, in terms of, am I drawn to the religions? I'm drawn to the Scripture. I do find that I think to be a really good Jew, or a really good Christian, or a really good Muslim, there's an implication that you have to let go of the other two. I always had the sense going into a Christian church that I was cheating on Judaism and Islam by going into a Christian church. And so I tend, although I do, when the situation presents itself, as it did here yesterday, when I was touring the Quick Center, and Jason, took me over and showed me the chapel, the side chapel with the kneelers. I'm very big on kneeling, so I pray, read, and kneel most of the time. Church, synagogue, or mosque, it would be all the same to me. I would be cautious about praying if it's an Orthodox environment where they're not going to want you to go in and acknowledge that Muhammad is God's last prophet and messenger. I think there are Christian churches that take a very dim view of kneeling down and saying that in their environments. But at the same time, I tend to think that that's between me and God. As long as I do it quietly, I'm not going to stand up and start screaming at the top of my lungs. Then, to me, a house of God is a house of God.
I'm curious from a career point of view. Well, first of all, I thought it was interesting. There was an interesting irony where you're going to church and you're doing reading of scripture. You bring more scripture into a comic book. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But anyways,
that's right. We get more scripture in Cerebus than we get in average 4 weeks in church.
But anyway,
more peanut butter, less peanut butter, more scripture.
I'm just curious, when you decided to follow some of these storylines, it's interesting because it started off sort of as a heritage, one about heritage. And at a certain point, you started having these other storylines that seemed a lot more sophisticated on its own, not only just for a comic book. And so did you ever decide, it's like, why do I want to go this way with a comic book in terms of like from a commercial point of view? Although I get I haven't read it, from what I've heard about your self-publishing book, that you're very big on at least have the discipline, putting something out, have the discipline to stick it out there. So even if it's something that people won't buy, at least they'll know it'll come out on time. So like maybe they'll just buy, I see how you at least try to, at least don't screw them that way. If they're going to invest in it, make sure that they have it. So I know that there's some sort of like nuts and bolts publishing thing behind it too. At what point is it just following your instincts like, no, this is the most interesting story or what,
You're not implying that it's not commercially viable to publish 80 pages of 8.5
I think the answer to that is in order to produce a comic book, it takes so much time. On average, it took me, let's leave the length of time writing and sculpting both mentally. Just actually putting characters and lettering on the page would take 7, 8, 9 hours. And the people reading that comic book page can read the whole thing in 2 seconds. It took you 8 hours to produce something that somebody goes, yeah, that's really good, where's the next one? So there's definitely a pressure in that case to satisfy your own interests. Because you're going to be spending so much time at the board, because you're going to spend so much time thinking about it, you really need to have a subject that you're interested in. Definitely, at the time, inspiring Kevin Eastman and Pete Laird to start Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, there was no question that if I had done Cerebus the Ninja, the sales would have gone through the roof. But the idea of spending 7 or 8 hours in the drawing room producing ninja drawings of Cerebus, why don't I just take a sharp stick and jam it in my hand or something? It's just about as painful. So that was progressively what happened in that case, was I have to do something that I'm interested in, and I have to do something that I'm really interested in, because it's so much work to do it. So progressively I did work through the political storyline, and then the religious storyline, and then a love story, but I can't, because that's just too basic a thing. I can't go out and get 5 years worth of love comics and read them and go, okay, now I've got to do that myself. Again, I would be stultifying. But if I bring in Oscar Wilde and try to write text pieces like Oscar Wilde, at the same time trying to do as authentic